And an upcoming session, we're going to hear from Cinnamon Rain on May 18th, who will speak about supporting the health and wellness of individuals who use drugs. And this promises to be a really important topic, and I think one that we really felt that we wanted to provide some space for as well and dialogue around. So thanks, Cinnamon, for offering to do that presentation. Today we will speak about hearing voices. Hopefully you're in the right room, you've signed up for the right webinar, and that's what we're going to speak about today. And we just wanted to give you a little bit of a heads up about an upcoming event in Abbotsford that really I think is a celebration and talks about stories and music from individuals who've been in a mental health crisis. On that notion of Abbotsford too, just to let you know that there is a new Hearing Voices chapter in Abbotsford beginning, and the first meeting held at Abbey House May 18th at 2 o'clock. So maybe keep that in mind, and maybe you could reach out to those lovely people if you were interested in becoming part of that group. And today it is my happy job to introduce our speakers, and I'm really pleased that we have some amazing people with us today. And I'm going to introduce Renee in just a moment, but I did really want to just maybe hopefully center this presentation today, because I think part of what PSR advanced practice does is really help to educate people in the system about potential benefits of evidence-based practices. And we feel that hearing voice groups, really, if we are more aware, it may really help promote the opportunities that people might have for recovery within hearing voice movements, and really help people connect and support their recovery with like-minded people. And a recent paper that Jill will speak about talks about the need for education and support, really to help mental health professionals become aware of the benefits of such intervention, for want of other word, and that what we know is that when people delivering services are able to make reference to help support people to connect to hearing voice groups, that it really seems to make a difference in terms of how often people might attend and how they feel supported. So I guess I'm just saying that to really connect hearing voice movements with other interventions that people might feel is useful for them. So I know Jill will speak a lot more about that as we pass her over. But let me just begin by introducing Renee. Lovely photograph, I think. Renee has worked in the mental health system since 2002 in various roles. Currently, she's program coordinator for the Consumer Involvement and Initiative Peer Support Program. She has won many awards, including Coast Foundation's Courage to Come Back Award, and PSRBC's Resiliency Award, and BC Schizophrenia Society's Calder Group. Renee holds a BA from SFU and a master's degree from UBC, and has completed Douglas College Community Mental Health Worker Program. Her introduction to the world of mental health services was as a service user when she began hearing distressing voices and was diagnosed with schizophrenia. So thank you, Renee, for being with us today. We also will hear from Sarah Smith, who's a peer support worker and co-facilitates Vancouver Voices and Visions groups. Her educational background is in science and art conservation. And we also have Jill Walker, who will begin the session with us, who's an occupational therapist. I'm sure many of you know her, in the North Shore Community Services. One of her passions at work is involving people in recovery from mental health service in service provision. And she's also involved in social enterprise and helped to set up the Hope Cafe, which is a partnership between Blends, Canadian Mental Health Association, and Vancouver Coastal Health. She has an interest in hearing voice groups and is part of the North Shore Hearing Voice Groups. She's interested in the power of alternative approaches to interpreting the experience that we call psychosis. And finally, we have dear Janet, who's with us in the room as well. As a voice hearer from a very early age, Janet has found solace in the hearing voice movement. She has also spoken candidly to audiences over the years about her experience with her diagnosis and the impact it has on her life. Speaking publicly, she says, has provided an opportunity for both advocacy and personal healing for her. Her passions continue to be her cats, music, and photography. I just want to say a shout out to people who are willing to speak about this movement, because we know that stigma is a huge issue for people. So we really just appreciate people bringing their voice forward to this platform. So thank you. So with all that in mind, I'm going to just pass you over to Jill. So we're going to do a bit of a shuffle of the camera. Here we go. Over to Jill.
There I am.
There you are. Looking wonderful.
Great. I'm just going to start my timer.
Okay, good.
Well, thank you, Regina, for the warm introduction. Thank you, PSR. Thank you, Michael, for tech support. Delighted to be here. So thanks, Regina, for the opportunity. So I'm going to start off the talk and a little bit of an overview about what the four of us are planning to cover. Oh, and Regina, I'll just let you help me with the slide.
Of course,
slide advancement.
Happiness. And Michael is just telling me that we don't see the camera. There we go.
There I am.
All right.
There
you are.
And then I advance with this little toggle.
And you advance with that little toggle. Absolutely. Right there. Oh, dearie me.
Oops.
Oh, Jan is switching over the slides. Sorry, Jan, I forgot to do that in the shuffle, so thank you for that. Appreciate that. Yeah. And there we go. And then you can use this thing.
Where do I click? Sorry.
You click on these arrows.
Okay. There we go. All right.
Alrighty.
Thanks, Regina.
You're most welcome.
So I'll start off the talk today, and together the four of us will share a little bit about what the Hearing Voices movement is, a little bit about the evidence for Hearing Voices groups. Renee will talk about the groups here in Vancouver and this area, and then Susan and Janet will talk about their own journeys. So as I get started, I'm going to talk about just the story of the North Shore Hearing Voices group and how it started. But I want you to take a moment to reflect before I do that and ask yourself the question, if you're alone in the room listening to this webinar, or if you're with a colleague, ask a question to your colleague. How would you feel and think if someone introduced themselves to you as a voice hearer? And I'll just give you about 20 seconds or so just to have a think about how you would feel and what you might think if that happened to you. All right, so I'm going to interrupt you and then move on to the story about how the North Shore Hearing Voices group started, and that question will make sense. So it started, I guess, around 7 years ago. It feels like a long time. And it was a conversation in my office between a colleague, Andrea Horowitz, and myself, and we were sitting in our cubicles, and Andrea said, you know, Jill, 2 of my clients are currently in the psych ward. Both of them are hearing horrible voices. The treatments they're receiving, the hospital stay, the medications, nothing's working. There must be something else we can do. Like, I just feel helpless to help them. At the time, I had returned from the UK where I worked for approximately 2 years, and I'd seen these posters on the wall saying Hearing Voices groups. So I said, Andrea, have you heard of those groups? Do we have them here? Because maybe that's some way we could help. And Andrea said no. So shortly after that, we had a MOT student from UBC join us, and we put her to work and asked her to do an environmental scan and find out, are there any Hearing Voices groups around in BC and Canada? And so what she found is that, yes, there were, none that we could find in Vancouver or BC, but Quebec had some Hearing Voices groups, and Toronto had this guy named Kevin Healy who had a group there, and our student was really innovative, and so she connected us to Kevin Healy through a Skype call. So I guess kind of like this, using technology. And that really stands out for me in terms of my own learning, because there with Kevin on the screen. My colleague Andrea and I and the student were there, and the whole idea was we wanted to learn from Kevin and find out what are these hearing voices groups and how can we start one. And so Kevin came on the screen, and he was at home, and I think his cat was behind him, and his daughter was running past, and he said, well, really nice to meet you. My name is Kevin Healy, and I'm a voice hearer. And I guess that was profound for me, and it's the reason I asked you to ask yourself how that would feel. My own training, working in mental health, and at the time I'd been working in mental health for 10 years, was that hearing voices are a symptom of a psychosis, a mental illness, and they're not something to talk about, let alone identify yourself by. So that was such a profound shift for me. So we were intrigued, and we thought, we want to learn more about this. So we got to work, and we did some research about what the Hearing Voices group is. So I'm going to share with you a little bit about what the Hearing Voices movement is. And it all started about 1987. Marius Ram, a psychiatrist from the Netherlands, and Patsy Haig, his patient at the time, were having a conversation in their office. And the story goes that Patsy, who was doing a lot of reading, said to her psychiatrist, "You believe in a God we never see or hear, so why shouldn't you believe in the voices I really do hear?" So they had an interesting conversation about the meaning of voices, and this led them to approach a popular Dutch call-in television show and do a poll. Who hears voices? Call in. And these were their results. They had 750 people respond, and they asked them, are you dealing with them? How are you doing? And they were intrigued because 150 people said, yeah, I'm dealing with them and I'm doing fine. That then led to the first World Congress of Hearing Voices, where Patsy, Marius Ram, and another woman named Sandra Escher started doing some research and investigations about this experience and how these folks were managing. And that really was the start of the Hearing Voices movement and something called Intervoice. So Intervoice stands for the International Network of Training, Education, and Research into Hearing Voices. And it's really a clearinghouse of everything hearing voices. And I'd encourage you to check it out because you can learn a lot about the movement, tips for getting started if you wanted to start a Hearing Voices group. What also happened out of that television poll was the World Congress for Hearing Voices, which is a conference that happens every year around the world and brings voice hearers together in support and alliance. And what's happened with Intervoice since 1987? Well, here's a quick scan. The most recent paper I read, published in 2017, said hearing voice groups now exist in over 20 countries. And in the U.S., there's several groups now as of the last 5 years. I can't remember exactly how many, but the point is these groups are spreading. So I guess the next thing to consider, especially for those of us who work in the formal mental health system, is, I guess, what are these groups and what is the evidence? So I'm going to share a little bit about that. I think the main thing, and it really gets back to what Kevin Healy did when he introduced himself as a voice hearer, is that the movement interprets the experience of hearing voices with a lot of openness. So one of the key principles of the movement is that these experiences can be considered spiritual, religious, paranormal, technological, cultural, countercultural, philosophical, medical. Really, the Hearing Voices movement provides a place where people can come and talk about the experience. It's quite a divergent from the mental health approach, which treats this as a symptom of an illness. And the next slide shows some more of the ethos, that the movement does not see hearing voices in itself as a sign of illness. It considers it a normal variation of human experience. So unlike other approaches like CBT for psychosis, acceptance and compassion therapy, and different approaches that we teach in more of a medical setting, the Hearing Voices groups, they don't consider themselves a treatment. They consider themselves a social movement where people can come together, get peer support, advocate for themselves and others, share experiences. So quite different. the structure of a Hearing Voices group, and Renee is going to talk about the different groups in Vancouver, but typically they're Hearing Voices facilitated. They adopt an expert by experience stance. They're typically a drop-in format. And like I said, they're really open. As one paper I saw that I read last night said, it's not brain science, it's just people getting together talking about their voices. This is a link, and I'd encourage you to check it out. We were fortunate to be profiled, our group in North Van, by the CBC, and so it's about a 10-minute documentary that you can check out about the group on the North Shore. So yeah, the literature. When we work in mental health, we need to focus on evidence-based practices. So there's a small but growing body of literature about Hearing Voices groups, and they really tend to say that these places offer a space for hope, for empowerment, and for control, for validation and normalization of experiences, the provision of a safe space, the provision for dissemination of information. So while the evidence base is small, it is growing, and so far it's showing these groups help people. And I'm going to end by talking briefly about a project I was fortunate to be a part of with Regina and Michael and some MOT students, where we wanted to add to this evidence base. So we did a small qualitative research asking some of the participants in the Vancouver area what their experience was of hearing voices. And the next slide shares a little bit about our methodology. We did 4 semi-structured interviews and a phenomenological analysis of them. And I love the topic, or the themes that the students and we created together, which was sharing secrets and shifting perceptions of weird, peers co-creating hope, and from conflict to coherence. And I'm going to share with you 3 quotes that illustrate these themes. So here's the first one. I went there and spoke to other people and realized that all of these other people had the same experience that I did, and that I didn't have to, keep that a secret, and I could talk about it. And it was pretty weird, I guess. Peers co-creating hope. I don't feel like I'm alone in the discussion as I normally would be if sitting with a psychologist or even a psychiatrist. And from conflict to coherence. The resolution of something that has happened and come to terms with. And you see that other people have been through that as well. And it becomes easier to accept yourself a bit better. So that wraps up my portion of the talk, and I'm now going to shift over the computer screen here to Renee, who's on my left, and she's going to share with you more about what's happening in Vancouver. So again, delighted to be here, and maybe talk to you guys later.
So we'll just go out.
Okay, let's see, perhaps move the mouse.
We got a member as well.
Thank you. So, so I'm Renee, and a big thank you to PSRBC for organizing this event, and I'm very happy to be here. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the Hearing Voices Network initiatives in Vancouver. I'm just going to fast forward a bit. So I apologize for the small print. I should have made this into 2 slides. But basically, the things that have happened in Vancouver have been started around 2013. So in that year, we had some workshops on supporting voice hearers. We had Ron Coleman and Karen Taylor from the UK come out to the Vancouver area. That was a partnership with the Unitarian Church and West Coast Mental Health Network. Also that year, the BC Hearing Voices Network had its first meeting, and that was started by North Shore and Vancouver. Then since then, we've got 2 community hearing voices groups. We call them Voices and Vision support groups. They're based on the Hearing Voices Network. They're peer-led, so led by voice hearers. They're open to anyone who hears voices, sees visions, or has related experiences, plus their supporters, so people can bring a peer support worker or a family member with them. We have one group that meets at a mental health team, a second group, a newer group that meets at Open Door Group, and people don't have to be mental health service users to attend, so they just have to identify as someone who has unusual sensory experiences. Additionally, there is, with our same team of peer facilitators, we have a group that meets in the hospital at Vancouver General Hospital in the Seagull building. And that group is specifically for patients in the acute and tertiary wards of the Seagull building at VGH. Also, as I mentioned, peer-led. Then there's another group in tertiary mental health services in the Willow Pavilion that is partially peer-led and also expert by training along with the peer. There's a group. There's tons of groups in Vancouver now. There's Coast Mental Health has a group as well. They're a nonprofit organization, and we also have something called the Hearing Voices Network Study Club that I'm going to talk about in a little bit later. So I'll come back to that. So lots of groups. It's really taking off. I wanted to highlight something from the guidelines that all of our groups use, and I think the North Shore groups use the same guidelines. They come from the Australian Hearing Voices Network, so we've borrowed them. And there's quite a few guidelines, so they're not all on this slide, but I wanted to talk about two in particular that I think help to illustrate what's different about Hearing Voices Network from traditional approaches. So one of the guidelines that we use in our groups is that the group sanctions the freedom to interpret experiences in any way. And a second guideline on the list is also makes no assumption of illness. So what that means is that you can interpret your experiences anyway. So illness is a perfectly valid way of understanding your voice hearing experience. It's how I understand my experience. But it's not the only way. And so, as Joe was mentioning, other ways are okay too. You might understand it as a paranormal experience, as a spiritual experience. Perhaps you think of it your voices as coming from ancestors or family members who've passed away. And some of those alternative ways of understanding the voice hearing experience actually carry more meaning for people than the medical model way of understanding it. And some people believe in both. So I do think of my experience as illness, but I also have a second way of understanding my experiences too, which carries meaning for me. And an interesting thing I was reading is that for some people, the illness model is great. You know, you think of it as illness, what do? You take medication, and if you're lucky like me and the medication works well for you, great. But for other people, some of these alternative ways, in addition to carrying more meaning for them, can also be more empowering. So if you're a person who thinks of it as illness, what do? You take the medication, but maybe you're a person the medication doesn't work so well for, because there are people that it only partially helps or doesn't work at all for. If you're one of those people and you're thinking of it as illness, then it can leave you feeling a bit disempowered because you're doing what you're supposed to do. You're taking the medication, but you're still struggling with your voices. If you think of it in one of these alternative ways, spiritual, for example, it can actually make you feel more empowered because then you have a chance to shift your relationship with your voices. So spiritual, paranormal, dead ancestors. The locus of control can be thought of as internal as opposed to external. So some of those alternative ways for some people are actually more empowering. And the other thing about the group being open to multiple ways of understanding the experience is you don't turn anybody away. You know, if we had people coming to the group and we said you have to think of it as illness, that's the right way, your way is the wrong way, we'd alienate a lot of people. So it's very flexible, I think, and I really like these two guidelines. So I'm a little bit unused to this computer here. On to my next slide. So Jill has talked about Hearing Voices network around Canada. So I won't spend too much time on this, but the first groups were in Quebec and Ontario, and then we have British Columbia, and there's a group in Manitoba as well. So it's spreading. I wanted to share one personal experience with you, and it's kind of the experience, one of the experiences that drew me to really embrace the Hearing Voices network and really value it. And so this experience happened while I was really struggling with voices. So I heard very negative, nasty voices. I heard them all the time. It caused me a lot of distress. This was a time when I was hospitalized multiple times for making suicide attempts, trying to escape my voices. And I ended up being put on something called extended leave, and I was put on it twice. And extended leave is a form of involuntary treatment in the community. So what it meant for me was that I was allowed to leave the hospital and go home, but there were conditions, and the conditions were that I take medication, I go to a mental health team and see a case manager, and I see a psychiatrist. And I was told that if I didn't do those 3 things, I would just get sent back to hospital where I would be forced to take medication. So I was on extended leave, and I was taking medication because I was required to take it, but I hadn't found the medication that I'm on now that works so well for me yet. It was a bit of a process to find that medication. So I was taking medication, and I started hearing voices again. And the voices were causing me a lot of distress, and I was contemplating suicide to escape them. But I had an appointment with a case manager, and didn't really think she could help, but I was kind of desperate. So I went to that appointment, and I told her that I was hearing voices again. And I said, I need to figure out a way to cope with them. Her response was to tell me that the way to cope with my voices was to take my medication. And then she told me about what a good medication I was on. And I don't necessarily think that was a bad response, because I was very opposed to medication at the time. I thought of it very negatively. And as it turned out, there was one out there that works really well for me. So it wasn't necessarily a bad response, but I remember wishing that she had more to offer than just medication, that she had more tools in her toolbox. So that's hence the picture of the toolbox on the slide there. And I think for me, that's what Hearing Voices Network is partially about, is the idea of wellness tools that come from RAP. It's giving people more tools to find ways to live well with these experiences, or to live beyond them. And so that's what the Hearing Voices Network is about for me, is offering more tools to both service providers and voice hearers. And I think that as long as we have cases where it takes a long time to find the right medication, which it felt like a long time for me, it took about 4 years, or the meds only partially help with the person who's experiencing distress from their voices, or you're one of the unfortunate people they don't help at all for, or maybe you just don't want to go the medication route. Your experiences carry meaning and you value those voice hearing experiences. As long as we have those scenarios, we need to have more approaches, more tools in our toolbox. So that's a bit about why I appreciate the Hearing Voices Network, and I will say it's really shifted a lot of my assumptions around voice hearing. So I'm going to turn it over now to Sarah, and I'll just pass the computer on to her.
Hi everyone, I'm
Do you want to shift your slide?
yeah, let's get the slides sorted out first. There we go. Yes, hello everyone. I'm delighted to be participating in this webinar. I've been a voice hearer for the past almost 3 years and got involved with the Hearing Voices movement very early on, shortly after my diagnosis. I find my involvement with this group to have played an essential role in my recovery journey. Before I tell you a little bit about the various Voices and Visions groups, as we call them here in Vancouver, I would like to provide a brief overview of the onset of my voice hearing experience and to share with you some of my personal experiences as a voice hearer. So it was 3 years ago when I was admitted to the psychiatric ward of our local hospital for a sudden onset of hallucinatory voices. From that point onwards, I've not been given a minute's rest from the voices. I hear them all the time. For example, while trying to fall asleep, while talking to other people, while eating, while listening to music, the voices invade everything that I do. Kind of like unwanted visitors, some of them with good positive messages and others with super negative and offensive comments. While I've learned over time to tune out the voices and to lower their volume by gaining more and more control over them, it may appear at times that the voices are completely gone. But in fact, if I'm silent and listen very carefully, they are still constantly chit-chattering in the background. At the time, it appeared that my world had suddenly been permanently altered, and I remember feeling so helpless. My anxiety levels went through the roof, and I can confidently say that the acute stage of my psychotic episode probably lasted for about a year, during which I somehow miraculously managed to still go to work full-time with the help and support of my mom and other close friends who gave me constant reassurance that I would get better. This strategy of keeping busy and active has proven to be beneficial for me even to this day. On my recovery journey, and I find that when I keep busy with various meaningful activities in my life, my voices are generally happier and recede to the background. So I'm not bothered and distracted by them as much. I've been introduced to many mental health professionals who have been conscientiously working with me and trying to ease and treat my condition. And while talking to my psychiatrist, nurse, occupational therapist, naturopath, counselor, so all of these wonderful mental health professionals, it was all very soothing and helpful. However, I felt that I needed to seek out other voice hearers. I wanted to talk about my experiences with people who could sympathize with me and understand what I'm going through based on their own personal experiences. At the time, I had not talked to a lot of people about the fact that I was hearing voices, and the issue was weighing heavily on my mind. I needed to get it out into the open, and more importantly, talk to people who could understand me. In the midst of being totally anxiety-ridden and feeling completely helpless, I reached out to my nurse at the Vancouver Coastal Health, and she pointed me in the direction of the Hearing Voices Network Study Club. And I remember attending my very first session only after a couple of months of being diagnosed. And I remember thinking that I finally found the right kind of resource for me. I was introduced to many wonderful books on hearing voices and other unusual experiences, and I remember thinking, finally, like some tangible advice on what to do. What solidified the experience further was having group discussions and hearing firsthand about other people's coping strategies and how they deal with their voices. Just to listen to other people have similar experiences as me made me feel a lot better, made me feel like I'm not alone with all these unusual experiences. And better yet, when I was given the opportunity to talk about myself, it felt like a weight had been lifted off my chest, like my secret was out in the open, and at that moment I felt that I had gained some control over the voices. There were other fabulous resources shared at these meetings, like access to books, articles, and documentaries, which have given me hope that I just may be able to endure my condition. Because there were moments, I'm not going to lie, there were moments when suicidal thoughts would roam around in my head, thinking that I would not be able to cope with my condition. And for me, medication alone never offered full relief from the voices, and so I had to learn other coping mechanisms. I learned to establish relationships and boundaries, especially with my positive voices. And with the help of my counselor, I psychoanalyzed the messages that I was receiving. So, if you ask for my opinion, the bulk of my recovery has been through psychotherapy and talk therapy, and not much through medication. Indeed, it was my counselor who helped me come to the realization that the content of my voices were directly related to my subconscious and had to do with underlying issues and problems from my past. Issues that I had buried from my childhood and adolescence, and which I now needed to confront. The voices wanted me to uncover and deal with those issues in order to change certain behaviors, certain thought patterns, and ways of thinking. Again, it was my counselor who taught me to decode those messages, and she encouraged me to analyze the content of my voices using the symbolic language of dreams. I became very much involved with the Hearing Voices network groups, or the Voices and Visions groups as we call them here in Vancouver, and was approached by the coordinator, Renee, to co-facilitate a few of the groups in Vancouver. I took on this task and feel very satisfied to be involved with the recovery process for people out there who have a similar condition as me. It gives me great satisfaction to know that I'm providing a safe atmosphere and environment for people to share their insights and their stories and their coping strategies, and just being there for each other. The meetings foster great discussions, and people from all walks of life attend. Currently, I co-facilitate 3 groups, and Renee already went over these, but I'll just briefly mention them. So one is the Vancouver General Hospital, and it's for the inpatients who are admitted to VGH. And the other 2 are community groups. One is at the Grand Bay Woodlands, and the other one is at Open Door. And they are community groups. They are for members of the community who hear voices and have other unusual sensory experiences. The Voices and Visions groups have helped me tremendously in understanding my experiences as a voice hearer, and I look forward to each session. I no longer view myself as an individual with a mental illness. Rather, I view my voice hearing experience as part of the diversity of being a human, and as a faculty that is uncommon but significant. And finally, I'd like to thank you for listening to my story, and I'd be happy to address any questions that you may have later on. But for now, I will turn it over to Janet.
Hi, I'd like to thank Jill Walker and everyone for getting me here. It's a pleasure to speak to you today, and I'll just jump in and just throw the cat out of the bag, so to speak. I have been ill since about the age of 12 with basically mental illness. It's very undecided what really the illness is. They thought it was maybe mood disorder, then they thought it was paranoid schizophrenia, then they thought it was schizophrenia, then they thought it was a mood disorder again. So I'm a mixture of anything. I think I've been a voice hearer since the age of 13. I had my first hallucination after a night of partying with friends, and I came home in the morning, and I was drinking my orange juice at the table, and all of a sudden I heard a whole crowd of people talking all at once in my head. I couldn't make out what they were saying. It was like being in a busy shopping mall or something. And I said to my brother, "Did you hear that?" And he said, "Hear what?" I thought, well, that's weird. So I'm not going to talk about this. I don't want people to think I'm crazy. So over the years, I had these isolated incidents where I'd have these voices happening, and I just kept quiet about it because I didn't want to think people to think that I was weirding out. Anyway, it wasn't until I turned about 17 that I had my first break, and but leading up to that, I had major problems. I was just driving my parents crazy. My mom was a nurse, and she worked part-time. My dad was a teacher, and I was having trouble going to school. I couldn't stay in school full-time, and it was just driving everyone crazy. But anyway, being ill from the age of 13 on has been a real learning experience for me. I think because I got ill in the early 80s, and I was medicated at 17, and the medications back then weren't perfect. They had lots of side effects, and they really and the therapy back then was not well. There was no kind of there was no hearing voices groups. They really they encouraged me to just block the voices out, and really there was just a real code of silence around even talking to someone about their voices. It was considered a mark of shame, and so I spent the better part of my adolescence and adulthood learning how to block my voices. And I became very, very skilled at it. I mean, I every time they would start to natter away at me, I'd just be blocking. But, like anything, you tell somebody to do something and it's against their human nature, they're going to start doing it more and more and more. And, but over the years, I became so skilled at it that I managed to get jobs, I managed to work, I managed to volunteer, I managed to get a group of friends. I had a lot of success, and but it wasn't until the voices finally came through the cracks, and they really they needed to be addressed. It reached a crisis point in my 40s where I had been, building up the walls higher and higher and higher until the voices just tumbled right over, and I was crushed. I was just shattered because I couldn't block them out anymore. They just needed to be addressed, and so I ended up, without friends. I ended up quitting my jobs. I ended up in the hospital. I was addicted to a couple of things, and it was a real mess. I was pretty crushed. And I found my way back through mindfulness and CBT, and one day my mom said she was connected with the North Shore Schizophrenia Society, and one day she said, you might want to check out the Hearing Voices group. I think that might help you, And I said, Mom, that's about as flaky as the megavitamin therapy suggested in 1980. And my mom's a nurse, and she wants to help, and she's, bless her soul, she's 84 now, and she's still a retired nurse, and you never stop being a nurse. It's a bit of an affliction, Anyway, she was right, though. She had the right idea. She knew me, and she knew I'd respond to this very well. And so I kind of took it home and just let it mill around in my mind for a while. And I thought, and then I went online and looked into it, and I thought, there might be something to that. I've spent so much time and energy at blocking out the voices, and it's taken so much energy, and I'm so tired of just constantly putting up this wall against the voices. I've never had an opportunity to really experience them and play with them, and experiment with them and see what they're saying and why, and what they're about. And I've always just been told, block them out, they're bad, these aren't good guys, And so I did join a Hearing Voices group, and the one in North Shore that Jill mentioned. And in the process, I was going through a CBT group as well, and a mindfulness group. And the fusion of those three things helped me get back on my feet again. At one point, I was running for the bus, and I have put on weight since I quit my addictions. Like, ever since I quit smoking, food smells so good. It tastes even better. Cooking is like huge. But yeah, no, everything smells better now that you're not doing addictions. But you know, I was running for the bus one day, and I thought, oh, geez, I feel so heavy. I need to lose about 40 pounds. And then I got on the bus, and I was, and then I sat down, had my iPod in, and I heard, and the guy across from me in the aisle he was down, he was looking at his iPad or something, and I could hear him say, "You fat cow," and you know, I really did hear his voice say that, but a part of me thought, okay, I had been through the hearing voices enough to know that I had had the thought, like maybe 10, 15 minutes before that happened, that was me projecting it onto him. And that was the first time in a series of events that I started to make the connection between my thoughts and the hallucinations, where I could see that I'd have a thought, and then maybe it could be even an hour or two later, I'd project the thought onto somebody. It had to be a moving target, right? A person or something. It couldn't be a dog or a tree. It had to be someone who was thinking, feeling, you know, had ideas, you know, had opinions or whatever. And sure enough, yeah, it was a breakthrough point. And the minute I started kind of acquainting myself with the voices and experimenting with them and kind of, you know, seeing what I could do, how far I could push them. They were pushing me so far for so long. How far could I push them? You know, the more my anxiety went down about them, because for years, anytime the voices would start, that there would be this panic that would start to rise and rise and rise. My panic would start, and it would just be like it would go and go and go until I took an Ativan or I took a clonazepam, and then it'd be like, oh, relief. Oh, I don't have to worry about it anymore. It's all blocked out now. I'm safe. But now I don't have to worry about that anymore because I'm not scared of them. I've kind of gotten to the point where they're no longer so threatening because I realize they're a part of me. And another thing that happened one time, and this combines sort of the mindfulness part of the part of my experience with therapy and getting better. It was when I was going to the mindfulness and CBT. I was on my way to a Hearing Voices network, and I was walking along the street, and there was a couple behind me, and they were talking away in different language, and they were talking and laughing. And I was walking, and I was walking really fast, trying to get away from them. But they were walking just as fast, and it was turning into a walking competition, you know. And well, I was taking that point of view. I don't think they saw it as that, and they were just wrapped up in themselves, in each other. And I thought they were talking about me, and they were laughing at me, but. I thought, okay, I'm going to stop and I'm going to sit down on the bench. If they turn and look my way, then I'll know they're talking about me. So I sat down on the bench, and they didn't look my way. And I thought, okay, that's a good sign. They're not talking about me, but they continued to like talk and laugh and laugh. And so I thought, okay, I'm just going to close my eyes. Just going to close my eyes and deep breathe. And I was closing my eyes and deep breathing, and I could hear them talking and laughing and getting further and further away. And I thought, it's me. It's me. It's not them. It's me. Because I've been sitting in bed for the past 2 days feeling depressed, and I feel vulnerable, and I want to blame them for it. And that was another turning point. It's when I realized that I'm responsible for my own wellness. You know, I can decide to be happy, or I can decide to be miserable, and it's a choice I can make. You know, and that kind of glued it into place. That soldered it into place. So it's been a long while coming back from pretty treacherous territory, but I do think hearing voices is a gift. I see it as a stumbling block, but it's also a gift. I think people who are voice hearers see and catch the things that other people miss. And I think that we just see outside the box. That, I don't know. It's just the way it is. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Janet. I'm just going to pass it back to Renee for a minute. And sorry about the camera, guys, as we do that transition.
No worries. Thank you, Jen. That was amazing.
Thank you.
I'm quite nervous, and I forgot to talk about something that I meant to talk about. I was asked to talk about the Hearing Voices Network Study Club, which Sarah mentioned. So I'm going to go back a few slides and just cover it off. So I just wanted to say a little bit about it. So it was one of the Vancouver Hearing Voices initiatives. It's the last colored bullet on the slide here. And it's, I think it might be a bit of a unique group that we started because, for a few reasons. One thing is that, well, first I'll tell you what it is. It's a study club that's open to everyone. So voice hearers, vision seers, others with unusual perceptual experiences, friends, family, service providers, or people in the community who are just interested. And it's kind of like a book club in a way. So we meet to discuss literature, videos, and podcasts related to the Hearing Voices Network. And it meets at Creekside Community Center. And that's where I met Sarah. So we started it because many of us wear more than one hat. We're voice hearers, but maybe we're also service providers working in peer support. And we wanted to get away from the silos that sometimes exist between groups that are for family members and groups that are for service users and groups that are for service providers, and just bring everybody together into a learning community where everybody is there as an equal on equal footing. And our group is attended by people from all three silos, and we come together to share our insights and to learn from each other, as well as to learn from the literature, the videos, and the podcasts that are related to the Hearing Voices Network. So it's been a really powerful experience for me to be a part of that group. And as I've mentioned, I've shifted my perceptions of voice hearing, and I could tell you stories about that, but we don't have time. Another thing about this particular group is that we deliberately set it in a non-mental health site. So it's not at a mental health team, it's not at the hospital, it's at a community center. And that was to get away from linking the voice hearing experience with the mental health system and the notion of illness. So, because we are open to so many ways of understanding the experience, and some people value their experience. So that's something I meant to say and I forgot. So thank you for listening, and now I'll pass it back to Regina.
I'll just come beside you here for a second.
Okay.
So we mentioned too that we'd be very happy to take some questions. So before we do that, or while maybe you just get some ideas of questions you might want to ask, just want to really thank our speakers. I think we just heard from Jill first, who gave us a really helpful and interesting situated overview of the topic that we know can be very controversial. So we'll often meet people who sort of have very strong opinions about hearing voice movements, and I think really you situated it in as somebody delivering services and an advocate for this movement to really help us understand that from your perspective. And then we had from Renee, who's also a innovative soul who's brought a lot of this work to Vancouver, and to share your own story a little bit too, Renee. We're very, very grateful, as we are to both Sarah and Janet, because I know that can't be easy, or maybe sometimes it is, and I think really you've left us with the idea that it's a gift, and I think, Renee, you've left us with the idea of really trying to break down some of those silos, and that seeing this work, as I see it as well, as being maybe a resource for people where they can really. Janet, you just spoke so beautifully about your journey of making friends, I think, with the voices, and managing them in some ways that they end up being a gift to you, which I think is maybe a novel way for many of us to hear about that. So I'm grateful, and I think your heartfelt story too, Sarah, of just your incredible journey of courage. And as you described, your successes alongside that. So let's just turn it over and see if we have any questions or comments from people in the audience. Just maybe people are thinking or having a typing. So James is typing. Thank you, James. And if you want to direct your question to a particular person, we can pass that along. But hopefully you found this to be an engaging and enriching presentation that hopefully has touched on both personal experience and the literature and the experience of people trying to develop some of these resources. So we'll just wait for James to, who says, thanks so much for those who shared their journey, he says. Your courage and authenticity is a refreshing blessing. As always, eloquent, James. Thank you. And I see that Sue is typing as well. And you'll remember that these sessions are archived on our psyrehab.ca website. So if you'd like to listen to it with all of the resources too, that it'll just be there for you at your leisure. So it usually takes us about a week to put it up on the website. So hopefully you have that website, and just I'll type it in. I'm sure you do, psyrehab.ca, just in case. Maybe there's some new people. And Monica just adds to James's comment as well to say ditto. And then we have Sue typing, so we'll just see if there's another comment. Sue says, thank you for sharing these resources. It's great to know these groups exist and where to find them. Thank you for sharing your experiences. Thanks for that comment, Sue. Appreciate that. And so maybe I'm not sure if anybody wants to say any closing things. Veronica's typing, so we'll just wait to hear from her. But I'm not sure if anybody has any last minute. I'm just looking at the room. Last minute reflections. If so, just let me know. And Veronica's just working on a comment or question, perhaps. But I feel that it's a real privilege to have such wonderful expertise with us this morning. Thank you. Veronica says, that sounds like an amazing program. Is this program available in the Fraser Valley? So, anybody like to take that question? Is this program available in the Fraser Valley?
There's a group I know of in Chilliwack, and I understand there's a new group forming in Abbotsford. Do you know the others, Jill?
Yeah, and I know.
Let's give it around here to Jill. Sorry,
Renee and I were actually invited to speak to the OTs in Fraser Health. Remember?
Yes.
3 years ago, Renee and I headed out. So I know there were some OTs that were really interested in getting groups going, but I don't know whether they've succeeded in situating any within Fraser Health. I just know what Renee said, Chilliwack and Abbotsford.
Can you pass it back?
Absolutely.
One thing, I invite people, who, if there is a group out in Fraser Health, if you Google BC Hearing Voices Network, there's that group that started back in 2013. And we're trying to list all the groups we know of on that website so that people, regardless of where they live, can look up and see if there's a group in that area. So the Chilliwack group is on that site. Be great if Abbotsford joined. And if there is a group out there in Fraser Valley, you can contact us through that website, and we'd love to put you up on the site.
That's great. That's a great resource.
And I guess I'd also mention that we had some folks drive all the way from Surrey once to our North Van group, and then used sort of their learning at our group to set up their group. So if you're out there in the audience and you're interested in setting up a group, come to the study club, come to a Vancouver group, come to North Shore, and we'd be more than happy to help you out.
Cool. Monica's asking, did you do presentations throughout BC? I'm in the southern interior, she says. So I'll just pass that to Jill to start. And
I think I did one for EPI about 4 years ago, and that was in Abbotsford, actually. But yeah, Renee and I are happy to do presentations. We've done quite a few together, and so if you'd like to invite us to come, we'd be happy to come.
Well, there you go.
I know I'm volunteering you, Renee, but
Oh, I'm always happy
I
to
love
talk
presenting
about
with you,
Hearing
so
Voices Network.
happy. and the other ladies in the audience.
That's really great.
Yeah, we're all a good team.
Cool. Well, Monica, you're asking some great questions, and hopefully you're finding some good resources as well. So thank you for that. I just noticed that Jen has provided the link for the evaluation. So as always, please know that we love to hear from you. So thanks for adding that link there, Jen. I appreciate that. And I see Michael added a link as well to the Hearing Voices Network site. So thanks for that as well, Michael. And Monica's just asking, awesome, how do I get a hold of you? Do you want to just type in your email? So I'm just going to pass this to Jill, who will type in her email. And just one wee sec, sorry, just put the cursor in that wee box there. Sure. Off you go. So I'm assuming that once you email Jill, she will get things in motion and just...
Absolutely.
Yeah. So there we go. There we go. Alrighty. So that's Jill's email there. So I guess... do you know as well? So we'll and so I'm just passing it to Renee so that she can add her email as well. And so between that good team, you will be in good hands.
I'm nervous and my hands are shaking while I'm trying to type. There we go.
Super. You got it. You're on it. Alrighty.
Okay.
Cool. So just, I think that's all that's left, is to say thank you very much for being with us this morning, and we wish you a very happy and healthy